The impact rattled through Captain Alara Vance's bones as her scout ship, the Comet, plummeted through Xylos Prime's rust-colored atmosphere. Warning alarms screamed through the cockpit. The ship's primary systems flashed desperate red warnings before blinking out completely. Life support remained, thankfully, but she was going down hard. Mayday, mayday. This is USC Scout Vessel Comet requesting immediate assistance. Her voice remained steady despite the chaos. Coordinates unknown. Taking heavy damage after engagement with unidentified defense grid. Attempting emergency landing on Xylos Prime surface. Only static answered. The communication array had been the first casualty. Through the view screen, Alara caught glimpses of the infamous landscape below, jagged metal formations erupting from poisoned soil like massive blades, the ruins of massive chemical plants standing as grim monuments to corporate greed. The dagger forests of Xylos Prime, exactly where her mission briefing had explicitly warned her not to end up. She gritted her teeth, the pale, blue bioluminescence of her Signan skin flaring with adrenaline as she wrestled with the manual controls. The inner membrane of her eyes automatically deployed, filtering the harsh flashes of electrical storms that danced across the horizon. "Come on," she muttered, fighting for control as the ground rushed toward her. The impact came with a sickening crunch of metal. Her crash harness caught her body, but her left arm twisted painfully as the cockpit crumpled around her. The last thing she remembered was the taste of metallic coolant in the air and the ship's final systems shutting down. When Alara regained consciousness, her Signan biology had already begun mending the minor cuts and bruises, but her left arm hung useless at her side, definitely broken. The cockpit was a disaster of twisted metal and shattered displays, exposed wiring sparking dangerously. Outside, the perpetual rusty twilight of Xylos Prime cast an eerie glow through the cracked view screen. "Communications," she muttered, pushing aside debris with her good arm to reach the emergency systems panel. Her mission had been straightforward. Investigate unusual energy signatures from this forbidden sector of Xylos Prime. A simple reconnaissance flight that had gone catastrophically wrong when ancient defense systems had locked onto her ship without warning. As she worked to jury-rig the backup communications array, the atmospheric pressure suddenly dropped. Her Signan senses detected it just seconds before a massive static storm swept over the crash site. Brilliant blue-white energy danced across the metal wreckage outside, and then the section of fuselage above her groaned. Alara lunged for the exit hatch, but too late. Metal screamed as a massive section of the ship's outer hull collapsed inward, pinning her lower body beneath its weight. Pain shot through her legs, and her flight suit systems began overloading from the electrical surge. Through the haze of metal dust and blinding static discharges, a figure appeared, human-shaped but strangely calm amidst the chaos, wearing what looked like a patchwork of scavenged materials fashioned into protective gear. The figure moved with deliberate grace through the electrical storm, seemingly unaffected by the deadly energy crackling all around. For a moment, Alara wondered if her head injury was worse than she'd thought. The figure approached steadily, and despite her training, a childhood story flickered through her mind, the one told to scare young USC pilots in training. The ghost of Xylos Prime. The specter who haunted the abandoned planet, a human who'd somehow survived decades alone after the resource wars had rendered the planet uninhabitable. Nonsense, of course. A spacer's myth. Then the figure was beside her, leveraging the metal slab with a makeshift tool that looked cobbled together from industrial scraps. With surprising strength, they lifted the debris just enough for Alara to drag herself free. USC tech gets flimsier every year, the figure remarked in a distinctly human voice, rough from disuse. A man, she realized, though his face was partially obscured by a modified breathing apparatus. They really should stop using that cheap Proxima aluminum alloy in their outer hulls. Crumples like foil in a microwave. Alara blinked in surprise, both at being rescued and at the casual technical assessment. "Ooh, hold still," he interrupted, kneeling beside her. From a battered satchel, he produced medical supplies, remarkably clean considering the environment, and began examining her broken arm with practiced movements. Clean break. Could be worse. Her Signan skin flared with blue defensiveness. I didn't request an examination. And I didn't request a USC light show crashing into my backyard. Glow stick, he countered, fashioning a splint for what appeared to be scavenged composite materials. Yet here we are. My name is Captain Alara, Vance of the United Systems Conglomerate, she said stiffly. Congratulations. He secured the splint with surprising gentleness despite his brusque tone. The nearest USC outpost is about 60 million kilometers that way. He pointed vaguely upward. Hope you weren't expecting a shuttle. Alara studied him more carefully. His equipment was a fascinating mix of salvage and ingenious modifications. At his belt hung what looked like a homemade scanner cobbled together from mismatched components, and the breathing apparatus seemed to incorporate filters made from industrial materials never intended for that purpose. "You're him, aren't you?" she asked before she could stop herself. "The Spectre." He snorted. "I'm just a guy trying not to die on this hellhole." Speaking of which, he checked his makeshift scanner, which emitted a worrying series of beeps. "We need to move. That crash of yours stirred up the local automated security grid. Old corporate defense drones tend to investigate loud noises, and they're not programmed to be hospitable. My ship is scrap, and soon to be a drone target. You can come back for your toothbrush later." He stood, offering his hand. "There's an old transformer station about 2 clicks east. Reinforced structure, minimal radiation. Might have working power nodes we can use to get your suit recharged." Alara hesitated only briefly before accepting his help. Rising to her feet sent pain shooting through her legs, but nothing seemed broken below the waist. "Small mercies. You have a name?" she asked. "Several," he replied with a wry smile, adjusting his breathing apparatus. "None worth mentioning. Let's go, Captain Glowstick. The Dagger Forest gets extra stabby after dark." They set off across the treacherous landscape, the human leading the way with the confident steps of someone who had walked this deadly ground countless times before. The Dagger Forest lived up to its name. Metal formations, twisted, razor-sharp, and taller than buildings, erupted from the poisoned earth at irregular intervals. Some were clearly manufactured structures warped beyond recognition by chemical exposure and decades of electrical storms. Others seemed to have grown organically from the contaminated soil, as though the planet itself was sprouting weapons. "Watch your step," the man cautioned unnecessarily as they navigated around a pool of bubbling, sulfurous liquid. "Acid lakes form after big storms. This stuff will eat through your fancy flight suit in seconds." The air carried a chemical bouquet so complex that even Alara's enhanced Signan respiratory system struggled to filter it properly. Each breath felt like inhaling subtle poison. Her companion, however, moved with practiced efficiency, occasionally checking his jury-rigged scanner and adjusting their course. "You've been here a long time," Alara observed, not phrasing it as a question. "Long enough to know which puddles melt your boots and which ones just smell like they will." He paused, reaching into his pack to retrieve a small container. He offered her what looked like a protein cube, its surface an unappetizing gray. "Hungry?" Alara hesitated before accepting it. Her rations had been aboard the ship, and her Signan metabolism burned energy quickly, especially when healing. "What is it?" "Protein, minerals, synthetic nutrients. Tastes like sweaty socks rolled in chalk dust, but it'll keep you going." He took one himself, chewing without enthusiasm. Acquired taste. Emphasis on acquired. She bit into it and immediately regretted it. The taste was even worse than advertised, but she forced herself to chew and swallow. Nutritional requirements must be desperate if you're willingly eating these. "Oh, these are the gourmet option," he replied with dark humor. "Wait until you try the emergency rations." As they continued their trek, the landscape became increasingly industrial. The skeletal remains of processing plants loomed overhead, their massive pipes and tanks corroded, but still recognizable. Occasionally, the man would stop and make minor adjustments to their route, explaining curtly about unstable ground or lingering chemical hazards. "So, Alara ventured. The stories about you. Greatly exaggerated, I'm sure. They say you can predict the electrical storms. He tapped a scanner. This helps. The storms follow patterns related to the planet's magnetic field fluctuations. Nothing mystical about it. And that you can disable the old security systems. Most of them are half broken already. Just need to know which wires to cross. He shrugged. Basic engineering. And that you can talk to the broken machines. At this, he actually laughed, a rusty sound, as though rarely used. Now, that's just ridiculous. They rounded a massive, tilted storage tank, and the man suddenly froze, throwing out an arm to stop Alara. His scanner emitted a high-pitched warning tone. "Don't move," he whispered. Ahead of them, a shimmering curtain of nearly invisible laser beams crisscrossed the path, an ancient perimeter defense system, somehow still operational after decades of abandonment. "Old Nexicorp security grid," he muttered, "still running on emergency power after all these years. Persistent bastards." He reached into his satchel and pulled out what appeared to be a small speaker device assembled from scavenged parts. Carefully adjusting some dials, he pointed it toward the laser grid and activated it. A strange sequence of tones emanated from the device. Not quite music, not quite code, but something in between. The laser grid flickered, then reconfigured itself, creating a narrow corridor just wide enough for a person to pass through. How did you? Harmonic resonance pattern. These old Nexicorp systems were programmed to respond to specific maintenance override frequencies. He gestured her forward. "Quick now, it won't hold long." They hurried through the temporary opening. As they cleared the grid, Alara glanced back to see the lasers snap back into their original configuration. "That shouldn't have worked," she said. "Security systems that sophisticated should have redundancies against audio exploits. Should have, would have, could have, the motto of corporate engineering throughout the galaxy." He pocketed the device. "Lucky for us, cost-cutting measures usually started with security redundancies." They continued on, but Alara noticed her companion moving with a slight limp now, one hand occasionally pressing against his side. When they paused at a junction between two massive pipelines, she caught him wincing as he checked his scanner. "You're injured," she stated. "Old war souvenir," he dismissed. "Acts up when the atmospheric pressure changes." He straightened, clearly pushing through whatever pain troubled him. "Nothing compared to your arm." Before she could respond, a chemical mist began rolling through the industrial ruins, thick, yellowish, and ominous. The man cursed under his breath. "Chemical storm. We need cover." He pointed toward an enormous drainage pipe jutting from a collapsed structure. "In there. Quick!" They scrambled inside the massive concrete tube, just as the mist thickened around them. The pipe extended deep into darkness, but at least it offered shelter from the caustic fog outside. The man activated a small light attached to his shoulder harness, illuminating their temporary haven. The pipe's interior walls were covered with markings. Some were clearly old industrial warning signs and maintenance notations, but others were more mysterious. Hand-drawn symbols, tallied marks, and what appeared to be desperate messages scratched into the concrete. "What are these?" Alara asked, running her fingers over a particularly dense cluster of scratches. "History," he replied simply. "Some from the workers who built this place. Some from refugees during the corporate wars. Some from—" he shrugged, "others who found themselves stuck here over the years." Alara studied a crude map scratched into the concrete, showing what appeared to be safe routes through a section of the facility. "Your work," he nodded. "Some of it helps to remember which paths don't try to kill you." They settled against the curved wall of the pipe as the chemical storm intensified outside, filling the entrance with swirling, toxic yellow fog. The man checked his scanner, then extracted a second breathing apparatus from his pack, offering it to Alara. "Your Signan lungs are more resistant than mine, but they're not invincible. Some of these compounds will bypass your natural filtration." She accepted the makeshift respirator, noting the careful craftsmanship despite its salvaged components. "Thank you." They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the distant hiss of the chemical storm and the occasional beep from the man's scanner. Finally, Alara spoke again. The stories say you've been here since the resource wars. That's over 50 years. He stared into the darkness of the pipe. Time's different here. No real day or night. Just varying shades of chemical twilight. That's not an answer. No, he agreed. It's not. How did you end up here? After the evacuation, not everyone was evacuated. He cut in, his voice hardening. When the corporations realized they'd poisoned this rock beyond recovery, they pulled out their essential personnel. Executives, key scientists, valuable assets. His face twisted into a bitter smile. Maintenance engineers weren't on the priority list. You were an engineer? Among other things. He fidgeted with his scanner, avoiding her gaze. When you're left behind, you either learn to be a lot of things or you die quickly. But to survive here alone for decades, who said I was alone the whole time? The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. After a moment, he stood, checking his scanner again. Storm's thinning. We should move while we can. The transformer station isn't far now. As they emerged from the pipe, Alara looked at him with new understanding. The legends that circulated among USC pilots weren't just spacer tales. They were fragments of truth, distorted by time and distance. The man beside her wasn't a ghost or a mystical figure. He was a survivor who had adapted to an environment that should have killed him 100 times over. That, she realized, was more impressive than any myth. The transformer station loomed ahead of them, a massive concrete and steel structure, weathered by decades of chemical exposure and electrical storms. Rusted metal vines seemed to have grown into the building itself, twisting around support columns and through broken windows. The main entrance was collapsed, sealed by fallen debris and what appeared to be an ancient security lockdown. Main entrance is a no-go, the man observed unnecessarily. But there's a maintenance access through the cooling system on the east side. He led her around the perimeter of the structure, scanner constantly monitoring for threats. They eventually reached a narrow utility door partially concealed by corrosion and overgrowth. The electronic lock panel beside, it was dark and lifeless. Stand back, he instructed, kneeling before the panel. From his satchel, he produced a small toolkit containing an eclectic collection of wires, circuit boards, and tools. With practiced movements, he removed the panel cover, exposing the ancient circuitry within. Manual override, he explained, connecting various components in a configuration that made little conventional sense. These old systems had hardwired emergency protocols. If you know the right sequence. Alara watched, fascinated, as he essentially built a new circuit on top of the old one. He combined components that shouldn't be compatible, creating a jury-rigged interface between his own device and the building's ancient systems. Most security systems are designed to keep unauthorized people out, he muttered as he worked. But they're also designed to let authorized personnel escape in emergencies. He connected 2 final wires, and the door mechanism clicked. We just have to convince it that we're escaping, not entering. With a grinding protest of neglected mechanics, the door slid open a few inches, enough for them to squeeze through with some effort. Beyond lay darkness, broken only by the faint, intermittent flickering of emergency lights that had somehow maintained minimal function over the decades. Inside, the transformer station was a cathedral of dead technology. Massive control panels lined the walls, their displays cracked or dark. Overhead, a latticework of cables and conduits tangled like metallic vines. The air was stale, but less toxic than outside, filtered through the building's partially functioning environmental systems. Welcome to Nexacorp's Central Power Distribution, Node 47, the man announced with mock formality. Former pride of corporate infrastructure, current home to electrical anomalies and the occasional mutated rat. They moved deeper into the facility, their way illuminated by the man's shoulder lamp and the gentle blue glow of Alara's signet skin. Signs of a hasty evacuation were everywhere. Personal items abandoned mid-use, half-finished cups of long-evaporated coffee, jackets still hanging on wall hooks as if their owners had just stepped out. More disturbing were the signs of those who hadn't evacuated. Makeshift sleeping areas, rationed food containers, and in one corner, a small memorial of personal effects arranged with careful reverence. Others tried to survive here, Ilera observed quietly. This was one of the last facilities to lose atmospheric integrity, he confirmed. Good shelter, potential power source, reinforced walls. Made sense as a survival location. He didn't elaborate on what had happened to those people, but the silence spoke volumes. As they ventured deeper into the complex, the intermittent emergency lights became more erratic, some flickering rapidly while others pulsed in strange patterns. The man's scanner began emitting an irregular series of beeps. That doesn't sound good, Ilera noted. It's not. The core systems are more active than they should be. He frowned at his scanner. Something's powering the main energy regulation core. It should have died decades ago. Is that a problem? Depends on how corrupted its programming has become. He adjusted his course, leading them down a side corridor. These semi-autonomous systems were designed to operate with minimal human oversight, but they weren't meant to run for 50 years without maintenance. They develop quirks. They entered what must have been the main control room. A horseshoe of control stations surrounded a central platform where a cylindrical column pulsed with weak, erratic light. Displayed on cracked screens around the room were fragmented system diagnostics, some in languages Ilera didn't recognize. The ERC, the man explained, gesturing to the central column. Energy Regulation Core. Semi-autonomous system designed to manage power distribution throughout the complex. Basic AI protocols, nothing fancy, but enough to adapt to changing power requirements and threats. The moment they fully entered the room, the lighting changed. The erratic pulsing stabilized into a steady, wary rhythm, and several dormant screens flickered to life around them. It knows we're here, the man said quietly, and after decades of isolation, it's not likely to be friendly. As if responding to his assessment, a metallic grinding sound echoed through the room. One of the auxiliary doors slammed shut with alarming force. On a nearby console, warning indicators flashed. Atmospheric containment protocols engaging, announced a synthetic voice distorted by damaged speakers. Unidentified biological entities detected. Initiating quarantine procedures. And there it is, the man sighed. Always the warm welcome. The air vents suddenly hissed as the environmental systems activated, but instead of fresh air, Ilera's Signan senses detected a subtle change in composition, increasing carbon dioxide levels. It's trying to suffocate us, she warned. Standard containment protocol. Reduce oxygen. Force intruders to evacuate or pass out. He was already moving to a control station, fingers flying over the ancient interface. I've dealt with this before. There's an override sequence. Before he could finish, mechanical arms descended from recessed ceiling compartments. Maintenance drones designed to repair the facility, now repurposed as defenders. They moved with jerky, unpredictable motions, grabbing at the intruders with pincers meant for handling delicate electronics. Or it could skip straight to the aggressive response, the man amended, ducking beneath a swinging mechanical arm. That works too. Ilera rolled away from another drone, her broken arm limiting her mobility. Can you shut them down? Working on it. He had produced a small device from his pack and was attempting to connect it to the console while simultaneously avoiding the increasingly agitated maintenance drones. Cover the left panel. I need to establish a feedback loop. Ilera positioned herself between the drones and the console he indicated. Using her good arm, she managed to deflect the grasping pincers of the nearest maintenance arm. Her Signan reflexes gave her an advantage, allowing her to predict and avoid the somewhat predictable movement patterns. Whatever you're doing, do it faster, she called as a pincer caught the fabric of her flight suit, narrowly missing her skin. Engineering isn't a sprint, it's a got it. He completed a connection between his device and the console. Immediately, the attacking maintenance arms froze in place, their motors emitting a high-pitched whine of protest. Temporary override, he explained, already moving to the next console. Won't hold for long. We need to reach the primary control node and convince this paranoid piece of antique tech that we're not a threat. Convince it how? These systems were designed with maintenance protocols. Even in lockdown, They're programmed to recognize repair authorization codes. He tapped at his device. I've collected a few over the years. Problem is, this one seems to have developed some independence from its original programming. The lights in the room suddenly dimmed, then flared to painful brightness. The frozen maintenance arms began to twitch, fighting against the override. System integrity compromised, announced the distorted voice, initiating defensive countermeasures. A new alarm sounded, and the floor beneath them rumbled ominously. That's the primary coolant system, the man realized aloud. It's redirecting superheated coolant from the backup generators. He cursed, checking his scanner. We need to get to the central processing chamber. Now, they sprinted through the facility, narrowly avoiding jets of scalding steam erupting from rupturing pipes and maintenance hatches slamming shut behind them. The building itself seemed to be fighting them, guided by the increasingly erratic ERC. Through here, the man directed Alara toward a narrow service tunnel. It's a maintenance bypass. Should lead directly to the core. The tunnel was barely wide enough for them to crawl through single file, its metal surfaces uncomfortably warm to the touch. The man went first, scanner held before him, to navigate through the labyrinthine passageway. How do you know your way around so well? Alara asked, wincing as her broken arm scraped against the tunnel wall. Spent a few winters here, years back, he replied without turning. Before the ERC went completely haywire. Mapped most of the critical systems, hoping to get the communications array working. Did you? Partially. Enough to pick up transmissions, not enough to send them. There was a note of old frustration in his voice. By the time I had it stable, the ERC started showing signs of degradation. Became territorial. Had to abandon the project. They emerged into a spherical chamber dominated by a central pillar of light, the physical heart of the energy regulation core. Surrounding it were diagnostic stations and manual override terminals, most in various states of disrepair. The light pulsed erratically, cycling through colors in no discernible pattern. This is it, the man said, approaching one of the terminals cautiously. The primary interface. If we can establish a stable feedback loop, we might be able to convince it we're performing system maintenance. And if we can't, then it'll probably flood this chamber with radiation or toxic gas. He gave her a wry smile. No pressure. He began working at the terminal, connecting his device and inputting commands at a rapid pace. The core's pulsing light became more agitated, flashing in aggressive patterns. Unauthorized access detected, the system announced. Core integrity defense activated. The radiation indicators on Alara's flight suit began to rise. It's increasing the radiation output, she warned. I see it. The man didn't look up from his work. Your Signin biology gives you better radiation resistance than me. Can you access that terminal? He pointed to a station on the far side of the core. I need you to monitor the power fluctuations and tell me when they peak. Alara moved to the indicated terminal, pushing through the increasing discomfort as her radiation exposure climbed. The ancient screens displayed fluctuating energy levels, the patterns chaotic but not entirely random. There's a pattern, she realized, studying the energy spikes. Every fourth fluctuation peaks higher than the others. That's our window, the man called back. When the next major peak hits, I need you to engage the manual cooling override. Big red switch under the protective cover. Alara located the control, an actual physical switch protected by a dust-covered plastic shield. She waited, watching the energy levels climb toward the next major peak. Now, she called, throwing the switch as the energy spiked. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then the core's light dimmed dramatically, cycling down to a low, steady pulse. The radiation levels began to drop, and the facility's aggressive systems powered down one by one. Maintenance mode accepted, the system announced, its synthetic voice less distorted. Awaiting further instructions. The man exhaled slowly, shoulders slumping with relief. Nice work, glow stick. You just helped perform brain surgery on a senile AI. Will it hold? For a while. I've initiated a diagnostic cycle that should keep it occupied for at least a few hours. He disconnected his device from the terminal. Long enough for us to access the communications array without it trying to melt our faces off. They made their way through now-quiet corridors to a secondary control room marked External Communications. Inside, banks of equipment stood silent, covered in decades of undisturbed dust. Most of this is beyond repair, the man explained, moving directly to a specific console that showed signs of previous restoration attempts. But this long-range emergency beacon might be salvageable. I've been working on it during previous visits. He opened a panel revealing a complex array of components, some original, others clearly salvaged from disparate sources and ingeniously integrated into the system. He began the delicate work of reconnecting power sources and testing circuits. Alera watched him work, fascinated by the fluidity of his movements and his intuitive understanding of systems that predated both of them. He hummed occasionally to himself, lost in the puzzle of technological resurrection. "Hand me that flux capacitor," he requested, pointing to a small component on a nearby workbench. As Alera passed it to him, their fingers touched briefly. She noticed deep calluses and old burn scars on his hands, the marks of someone who had survived through technical skill and painful trial and error. "How many times have you done this?" she asked quietly. "Repair work?" "Countless." He carefully inserted the component into the beacon assembly. "This particular transmitter? This is attempt number 17, I believe." He glanced up with a tired smile. "Persistence is my only real talent. 17 attempts over how many years?" He shrugged. "Time gets fuzzy. After the first decade, you stop counting." The implications of his casual statement hung in the air between them. Alera tried to imagine it. Years turning into decades alone on this poisoned planet, fighting daily just to survive, attempting again and again to reach out to a universe that had left him behind. "The USC has changed since you were stranded here," she said softly. "After the corporate wars, the United Systems was formed. There are regulations now, humanitarian protocols." "Spare me the recruitment speech," he interrupted, though not unkindly. "I've intercepted enough transmissions over the years to get the general picture. New management, same game." He focused on a particularly delicate connection. "Hold this steady for me." She helped him align a power coupling, her signet bioluminescence providing useful illumination for the detailed work. As she watched him meticulously rewire the ancient beacon, a thought struck her. "You know, in the USC, your skills would be invaluable. Engineering this advanced, this adaptive, you could write your own contract." "Maybe I like it here," he countered. "No performance reviews, excellent parking, very quiet neighbors." Despite his flippant response, she caught a fleeting expression in his eyes, a momentary glimpse of bone-deep weariness beneath the carefully maintained facade of self-sufficiency. Hours passed as they worked together on the transmitter. The man taught Alera shorthand explanations of his techniques as they went, and she found herself adapting quickly to his unorthodox methods. Her signet dexterity proved useful for manipulating the smallest components, despite her injured arm. "Almost there," he muttered, making a final adjustment. "Power coupling is stable, frequency modulator is aligned. Now, we just need to—" His scanner suddenly emitted a shrill alarm. He grabbed it, eyes widening at the display. "We got incoming," he announced grimly. "Atmospheric entry detected. Not USC design." Alera leaned over to see the scanner. "Scavengers? Or worse, corporate remit faction, maybe." He pointed to the entry trajectory. "They're heading directly for this facility. Your crash must have triggered some old monitoring systems. Or they detected the power surge when we stabilized the ERC. How long do we have?" 20 minutes, maybe less." He returned to the transmitter with renewed urgency. "We need to get a distress signal out now." They worked frantically, racing against time. The transmitter slowly came to life, ancient displays flickering as power flowed through restored circuits. The man input a series of commands, aligning the transmission dish on the facility's roof. "It's working," he exclaimed with quiet triumph. "But the power's unstable. We'll get one shot at this before the system fries." "My identification codes," Alera said, pushing forward to input her USC credentials and emergency protocols. That will flag it as a priority distress call. As she typed, the facility rumbled ominously. The ERC was becoming agitated again, perhaps sensing the approaching ship or reacting to their increased power usage. Maintenance cycle is ending early, the man warned. We need to transmit now. Alara finished entering her codes. With a decisive keystroke, she initiated the transmission. The ancient equipment hummed to life, channeling power to the rooftop array. For a tense moment, the whole system trembled on the edge of failure. Then a single green confirmation light blinked on. "Signal away," she breathed. "Now we run," the man said, already gathering his equipment. "Those scavengers will be landing soon, and the ERC is about to throw another temper tantrum." As if on cue, the facility's alarms began blaring again. The floor shook beneath them as ancient security protocols reactivated. Through the doorway, they could see maintenance drones beginning to patrol the corridors once more. Back route, the man decided, leading her toward a service exit. Through the cooling ducts. It'll be tight, but it's our best shot. They navigated through increasingly hostile territory as the facility turned against them once more. The man used his intimate knowledge of the station to create diversions, releasing coolant gases to confuse sensors, short-circuiting control panels to seal corridors behind them, even reprogramming a maintenance drone to move in the opposite direction, creating a distraction. Alara followed his lead, impressed despite herself at his resourcefulness. Every challenge was met with immediate, creative solutions born from decades of survival in this environment. They reached the cooling duct access point just as the facility's internal sensors detected the approaching scavenger ship. New alarms sounded, adding to the cacophony. "Perimeter breach imminent," announced the system. "Unknown vessel approaching. Defensive measures online." "Good news. The ERC doesn't like our new friends either," the man commented as he pried open the access hatch. "Bad news. It's not picky about what it considers a threat." They crawled through the claustrophobic cooling ducts, navigating by the man's seemingly infallible mental map of the facility. Behind them, they could hear the scavenger ship landing, followed by the sounds of forced entry and weapon fire. Almost there, the man encouraged as they approached a grated opening. "This should put us out on the north side, away from their landing zone." He kicked the grate open and helped Alara through. They emerged onto a maintenance platform on the exterior of the facility, the perpetual chemical twilight of Xylo's prime greeting them. In the distance, they could see the scavenger ship, a bulky, heavily armed transport with ominous corporate markings painted over with crude symbols. "Remnant faction," the man confirmed grimly. "Ex-corporate mercenaries turned salvagers. They'll strip this place of anything valuable, including us if they catch us." They descended from the platform via a series of rusted ladders and makeshift handholds that the man navigated with practiced ease. The facility behind them was now fully activated, external defense systems engaging against the intruders. Weapons fire and explosions echoed as the scavengers fought their way deeper inside. "We need to put distance between us and that facility," the man said as they reached the ground. "Once those scavengers realize the transmitter sent a signal, they'll come looking for whoever sent it." They moved quickly across the treacherous landscape, the sounds of battle fading behind them. The man led them through what appeared to be random terrain, but was clearly a carefully memorized safe path, avoiding unstable ground, chemical seeps, and the deadly sharp edges of the metal forest. "Did the signal get through?" Alara asked between labored breaths, her injury making movement increasingly painful. "Can't be certain," he replied, checking his scanner periodically. "Atmosphere's thick with interference. But if your USC friend were monitoring this sector, there's a chance." A massive explosion behind them illuminated the rusty sky. They turned to see part of the transformer station collapsing in on itself, flames and electrical discharges consuming the structure. "Looks like the ERC decided to take the nuclear option," the man observed grimly. "Self-destruct protocols. Won't leave much for the scavengers to salvage. Or for you to return to." Ilera noted softly. He shrugged, though she caught a flicker of genuine loss in his expression. Just another shelter gone. This planet's good at taking things away. They continued moving, finding temporary cover in the hollow shell of what might once have been an industrial storage tank. The man checked his scanner again, then froze, his expression hardening. Multiple aircraft signatures, he announced. One matches the scavenger vessel profile. The others. He adjusted his scanner, his eyebrows rising in surprise. USC configurations. Moving fast. Ilera felt a surge of hope. The distress signal worked. My squadron must have been within range. And they're on an intercept course with the scavengers. He pointed to the sky where faint lights were now visible through the chemical haze. Looks like we're about to witness some high-altitude diplomacy. The distant lights resolved into distinct craft. The bulky scavenger ship rising from the ruins of the transformer station, pursued by the sleek, predatory shapes of USC interceptors. Energy weapons flashed, briefly illuminating the perpetual twilight. We should signal my people, Ilera said, searching her damaged flight suit for emergency flares. Not yet, the man cautioned. Let's see how the festivities conclude. Don't want to draw the wrong attention. They watched as the aerial combat intensified. The scavenger ship was heavily armed, but outmatched by the USC vessel's superior technology and coordination. After a brief but fierce exchange, the scavenger ship veered away, trailing smoke and debris, limping toward the horizon with two USC interceptors in pursuit. Looks like your ride's arriving, the man noted as a larger USC vessel descended toward the surface, its searchlights cutting through the chemical fog. That's my cue to disappear. Ilera turned to him sharply. You're not coming? Not my seeing glow stick. He was already gathering his equipment, preparing to fade back into the toxic landscape that had been his home for decades. You can't stay here, she protested. This planet is dying. You've survived against impossible odds, but for what? To die alone in this chemical wasteland. He paused, regarding her with an unreadable expression. What's the alternative? Become a USC curiosity? The wild man of Xylo's prime, rehabilitated and paraded before scientists and military brass. He shook his head. I've built something here. It's not much, but it's mine. The USC vessel was circling lower now, clearly having detected Ilera's Signan life signs. Searchlights swept the terrain around them. They'll find you a place, she insisted. Your knowledge of survival engineering alone is worth a commission. You wouldn't be a curiosity. You'd be an asset. Maybe I'm tired of being an asset, he replied softly. Been one my whole life. To corporations, to survival, to this planet. Maybe I just want to be unnecessary for a while. Ilera studied him, this man, who had saved her life, who had survived decades in an environment designed to kill, who had maintained not just his life, but his humanity and even his sense of humor in the face of unimaginable isolation. At least tell me your name, she said. Your real one. He hesitated, then gave a small, genuine smile. Let's just say, Lucky Engineer has served me well enough. The USC ship had spotted them now, hovering overhead as a rescue team prepared to descend. Ilera knew her window was closing. Exhausted, heart racing with the culmination of their desperate efforts, she suddenly understood the difference between the man standing before her and the legend she had heard about. The Spectre was a ghost story, a myth. This was a human being, scarred, stubborn, brilliant, and imperfectly, defiantly alive in a place where nothing should survive. She looked at the human and whispered, You're not real. You a legend. He seemed taken aback, then covered it with a dry chuckle. Legends don't have backaches and food shortages. Glow stick. He tapped his scanner. Better wave your people down before they start getting trigger happy. Ilera activated her emergency beacon as the rescue team descended on cables from the hovering ship. She turned back to say something more, but the man was already melting into the shadows of the metal forest, his form becoming indistinct among the twisted shapes. The rescue team reached her, fellow Signans and humans in USC uniforms, exclaiming over her survival and injuries. Medical personnel immediately attended to her broken arm and other wounds, while security personnel established a defensive perimeter. Captain Vance, a medical officer, examined her injuries. We received your distress signal. The entire squadron has been searching since your ship went down. What happened here? Alara looked toward where the man had disappeared, but there was no sign of him now. Just the toxic landscape of Xylos Prime stretching into the chemical haze. I had help, she said simply. From who? This planet's been uninhabited since the resource wars. Alara smiled faintly. From a ghost story. As they lifted her into the rescue vessel, she caught a brief glint of light from the edge of the metal forest, perhaps a reflection off the man's scanner, or perhaps just her imagination. The ship's hatch sealed, cutting off her view of the poisoned world below. In the medical bay, as they treated her injuries and debriefed her about the mission, Alara found her thoughts returning to the transformer station and the man who had saved her life. She wondered how many other shelters he had throughout this hostile world, how many ingenious systems he had jury-rigged to survive, how many times he had heard ships overhead and chosen to remain hidden. When asked about the unusual energy signatures that had been her original mission objective, she explained about the semi-autonomous ERC and its unexpected longevity. The USC scientists were fascinated, immediately planning research expeditions and salvage operations, talking excitedly about the technological insights that might be recovered. Alara didn't tell them about the man. Some legends, she decided, deserved to remain mysteries. In her official report, she noted only that she had utilized existing environmental knowledge to survive and locate a communications array. It wasn't a lie, not exactly. Days later, as her ship broke orbit from Xylos Prime, Alara stood at a viewport watching the rust-colored planet recede. Somewhere down there, a legend was walking through the metal forest, perhaps already building something new from the wreckage of the old, adapting and surviving as he had for decades. She thought about what he had said, about being tired of being an asset, about wanting to be unnecessary. In a universe of constant demands and expectations, perhaps the freedom of that toxic solitude was its own kind of peace. Or perhaps, she mused, he simply couldn't imagine belonging anywhere else after so long. Alara's Signan skin glowed faintly blue in the darkness of the observation deck, her thoughts turning to what awaited her. The debriefings, the medical evaluations, the return to the rigid structure of USC service. She would be considered a success story, having survived where many would have perished. But part of her would remain on Xylos Prime, walking alongside a legend through poisoned ruins, learning to see the deadly beauty in a world that should have been uninhabitable, understanding that sometimes survival itself was an act of defiance. The stars stretched before her ship as it accelerated away, each one representing worlds of possibility and connection. Yet she found herself looking back at the diminishing rust-colored sphere, wondering if a single figure might be watching her departure from some hidden vantage point, scanner in hand, the ghost of a smile on his weathered face. Some legends, after all, were painfully real.